Well, I'd like very much to thank the Dean and the Precentor for the opportunity to be with you today. As Heather mentioned, my name's Adrian Lane and I serve with the Bush Church Aid Society. Last year we celebrated our centenary with a wonderful celebration right here at St Paul's, and it's my great delight to be back here with you to update you on the work of the Society. For those of you not familiar with Bush Church Aid, we're an Anglican mission committed to supporting Christians in remote, rural and regional Australia as they reach out into their communities with the great news of the Christian message. In every state and the Northern Territory, BCA supports a wonderful variety of ministries, including local ministers, school chaplains, youth and children's workers, Indigenous pastors, theological students preparing for country ministry, and even a digital church project in Tasmania, which of course has proved very timely. In many places, these ministries are the only ministry in their area, and without BCA support, they simply wouldn't exist. You may remember the terrible fires we had at New Year's down at Malakuta in East Gippsland. Jude Benton's the minister there, at the only church actually in the community, and we've been supporting her so that she can serve full-time in helping rebuild the community. During this COVID pandemic, she's actually been leading all the services on the local radio. We've also begun supporting Jeremy and Claire Morgan, who are serving in the Central Mallee, based at Oyen. And their parish is frankly enormous, comprised of very dispersed farming communities who take massive risks planting grain and then are so dependent on the weather. We've also begun supporting George Hemmings as he takes up the role of Youth and Families Ministry Development Officer in the Diocese of Bendigo. Our country churches actually have very few young people when the need for them to learn of Christ's love is as great as ever. Well, I'd love to speak all day, frankly, about the various ministries we support, but we haven't time for that. So can I urge you to look up our website, bushchurchaid.com.au, bushchurchaid.com.au, where you can find all sorts of helpful information and sign up to receive our free quarterly newsletter and prayer notes. Well, our Bible readings today are actually remarkably pertinent to the work of Bush Church Aid. They focus on how we should live in this world now as we look forward to Jesus' return. In our Gospel reading from Matthew 25, we see Jesus preparing his disciples for the time after his death and resurrection, when he won't be around physically. A person's last words are important, aren't they? And these words from Jesus come just a few days before he's crucified. He's already arrived in Jerusalem for the last time in that Palm Sunday procession, where he is welcomed as a king, but not a king on a war horse or an elephant, but on a humble donkey. And in preparing his disciples, Jesus tells them this parable about a man who's about to go on a long journey. The man calls together his servants or his slaves, the word could be translated as either, and he entrusts his property to them to invest while he's away, each according to their ability. And actually, that's the first kingdom principle I'd like us to note here. We're to use all that's been entrusted to us for the growth of the Master's estate. We're to use all that's been entrusted to us for the growth of the Master's estate. As servants of Christ, we've been entrusted with much, haven't we? Compared to so many before us, and even now, we're healthier, wealthier, better educated, better taught spiritually, and have better access to an extraordinary range of communications. While we await our Master's return, let's think hard how we can multiply all that Christ has given us so that his kingdom, his people, can grow. In the parable, after a long time away, the master returns and calls each of his servants to give account of how they've used his property. The first servant has turned 5 talents into 5 more. A talent, by the way, was worth more than $1,000, an extraordinarily large amount for a slave or a servant to manage. The second servant has turned his 2 talents into 2 more. "Well done, good and faithful servants," the master responds. "You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." And that's the second kingdom principle I'd like us to note today. Faithfulness with a few things in this world will mean delightful responsibility for much in the next. Faithfulness with a few things in this world will mean delightful responsibility for much in the next. However, when the third servant or slave is called before his master, we discover that he's dug a hole and hidden his master's money. He hasn't used it for anything. He hasn't even put it in the bank to earn a little interest, and where it certainly would be safer. For some reason or other, he's got a wrong view of his master. No doubt he's been living on his master's estate while his master's away, enjoying the good things the estate provides: food, drink, community, housing, plus much more, no doubt. But he's actually been lazy, and he's found excuses not to work. He hasn't really believed his master would be returning. And his master is not pleased. And that leads me to the third kingdom principle we see here. Not working for the master now in this world will ultimately mean never being with the master or on his estate in the next. Not working for the master now in this world will ultimately mean never being with the master or on his estate in the next. Even what the third servant had is taken from him and given to the one who has 10. Now, at first, to us egalitarians in Australia, that seems harsh, doesn't it? But don't forget, the money has always been the master's. The slave's job was just to steward it and grow it, which he didn't want to do. So it actually makes obvious sense to give the talent to the one who's actually been the most fruitful, doesn't it? Even though we may not like to admit it. Indeed, when you think about it, it would be silly and even wrong not to. Because this master is on about the growth of his kingdom. Now, some listening today may be a little like that third servant. They may not understand how much God actually does love them. They may not understand all that God's got in store for them, for his servants, for his slaves, when Christ our Master returns. They may not like the fact that God ultimately calls everybody to account. But our reading from Judges clearly reminds us that God does hold everybody, especially his people, to account. And our reading from 1 Thessalonians 5 reminds us that Christ our Master will indeed return unexpectedly to both judge and to save his people and vindicate his people, as our Psalm 123, so plainly also affirms. So, friends, as we await his return, let's use all that's been entrusted to us for the growth of the Master's estate, knowing that faithfulness with a few things in this world will mean absolutely delightful responsibility for much in the next. And if you happen to be like that third servant, can I beg you to make a fresh start? Because not working for the Master now in this world will ultimately mean never being with the Master in the next.